Well, unfortunately, I'm back at it again. This time I'm having a coolant problem. My bike is overheating dramatically. Long story short, I get home from work and the bike's fine, but like right before I get home, I make a stop in town, and then it wasn't leaking, everything was fine, seemed like. I fired the bike up and I go home, but on the way home, a couple blocks away, it starts getting really hot. And so I get home and I pull over and I turn it off, and that's when I hear all the boiling. And it was boiling over from the reservoir. Wherever the hose comes out behind it or underneath it, yeah, it just dumped a bunch of fluid out on the ground. I was freaking out. Oh man, you don't want that to happen. There's all kinds of serious problems that could happen, like a blown head gasket if you get the bike too hot. But I did notice, and I didn't mess with it. I let it cool on its own about an hour and a half in the shade. Then I put it in the garage and just took the car the next day. Anyhow, that was yesterday, and I'm checking this bike out, and I looked at the oil. Obviously, I want to make sure there's no water in the oil. And where is it? I don't think you can see it. Oh, there it is. There it is. You can see as I tilt the bike level, the oil level is going to come up, and you don't see anything milky. The oil looks, normal. Looks black like it normally does in the sight glass there. So that's a good sign. And also, I don't know if you could see it. Sorry. But I still got a little bit of coolant. See that? It's right above the low mark on my coolant indicator dial there. See it? Moving around? Just right above that low mark line. So that's good. I didn't run completely out. Thank God. So I'm thinking the bike is okay. I didn't do any serious damage, but the only way to really tell, is to do a test on the coolant. And to do that, you got to remove the tank to get to the radiator, the top of the radiator, because the tank covers all that. And but before I fill it and I do this check, I'm going to go ahead and remove the thermostat. I put a brand new thermostat in about a month ago from Kawasaki, but you never know, right? You just never know. So I'm going to take the thermostat out, and I'm going to put it in a pan of water on my stove in the house, heat it up till it gets to whatever the degrees it is where it's supposed to open. I think it's like 190, somewhere around there. It'll be stamped on the thermostat, and I'll show you later in the video. But and if it opens up, hey, we're good to go. Thermostat's good to go. Don't need to worry about that. Okay, we can eliminate that as an issue. Okay. And then next, after that, I'm going to install the thermostat if it's good back in, button it up, and then slowly fill up my radiator with fresh 50/50 antifreeze. Top it off, leave the cap off, let it run, and watch the water level to make sure it's swirling or it's circulating. If it starts to swirl, then you know that you're getting circulation, and the thermostat's working, obviously. But if you see any kind of bubbles, that means you have a leak in your head gasket. There's a tear or a rip in your head gasket somewhere, and it's letting air blow by from the compression, and it's forcing air into your cooling system, which will, any kind of air bubbles in your cooling system is going to cause it to not work, and it's going to make a stoppage, and it won't circulate, which will cause it to overheat and will cause it to boil over like it did down here from the overflow hose on my I don't know what you call it. Oh boy. Anyway, from the coolant reservoir. God, I couldn't think of that. I don't know why. Okay, it's been a long day. Just got back from work. Hey, give me a break, all right? So I'm going to do that. Okay, that's the first steps I'm going to do. Now, I've heard if it does bubble a little, but not like excessive, but a little. You can get by with adding in that there's a sealant. Okay, there's different types, different brands that make it where you can pour it into your cooling system and it'll seal that leak in the head gasket. So, you know, hopefully there's no bubbles. I'm praying there's no bubbles, because that, you know, I don't want it to be that, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so I just pulled the gas tank. Of course, I shut the fuel off before I did that, and I disconnected the fuel line. Pulled the tank out. It's sitting right over there. Okay, now here's your radiator cap, and right behind the radiator cap, sorry, see here, see this bolt here? Okay, now these are new bolts that I put in. They originally have like a number 2 Phillips screw. Well, they were rusted and seized up, so I had to extract them, and I ended up putting 4 new bolts in with the right size thread, but with a regular you know, hex head to it instead of number 2 Phillips, because they don't strip out as easy when you try to remove and replace it. I did this about a month ago, okay, and I had a brand new thermostat from Kawasaki that I ordered online. Quite expensive. Parts for this bike are really expensive because it's a 95. It's crazy. Anyway, so I put it in, you know, and the one I took out, man, it looked bad. I'm surprised it even worked. But you never know, right? Maybe there's a defect in that thermostat, even though it's from Kawasaki. You just never know. So before I, you know, fill the fluids back up and check and do the check for the leak in the head, I'm going to go ahead and remove these 4 bolts, which is the thermostat housing, and separate this. And the thermostat is inside in this location behind here. So once you remove the 4 bolts and pull this back, you're going to see it, but you got to disconnect some hoses and lines. You lose a little bit of fluid. But anyways, I'm going to test that thermostat and make sure that it's working before I go any further. Okay, so I pulled the thermostat and it's stamped on there 82 degrees Celsius. Well, when you convert 82 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit, it's 179.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So roughly 177 degrees. Okay, so this thermostat cold, I measured it. It's like 1.5 inches between my fingers. Okay, so when this thing opens up, that's going to change, obviously. And this should pop out higher, but I'm not 100% sure, but we'll find out. So I'm going to measure this water with a digital thermometer, and when it gets to 177, this thing should open up. So the thermostat's working, and you can see how that brass piece really pushed up high above the rest of it. And when you pull it out of the water and it cools down, it's going to retract and close. So this thermostat is good. See how high it's above the housing there? Probably a good 1/2 inch. Now as it cools down, you're going to see it retract back down again. Oh, sorry. It's slowly going back down. See it? It's going back down. So this thermostat's good to go. It's not the issue at all. Look at that. It's about halfway from what it was going down. Probably a 1/4 inch sticking out now. And it'll almost go flush with the housing when it's totally cool. But I did notice the gasket that the thermostat goes against, it looks like there's a rip in it. So, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll use some cork gasket. I don't know. I'll figure that out tomorrow. See how much it went down now already? And I imagine you put underneath cold water, it's gonna shrink real quick. Okay, maybe I was wrong. I don't think it was flush to begin with. But it, you know, it's just barely sticking above the housing, right? And you saw how tall it was when I took it out of the boiling water. So, yeah, it's gonna stick. It's gonna push out about a good quarter to 3/8 more than what it is now. You could definitely tell the difference. So it's working. Okay, just to show you, it's like a 1/16 sticking up above the housing, just barely sticking up above it. And you saw when it got to temperature, it was like way up here. So this is closed, and when it gets to temperature, it's, you know, up here and it's open. It's allowing the coolant to flow through. So I need to figure out how to make a gasket for this thing. Alright, so I disconnected the thermostat housing from the bike and the hoses. It kind of goes in right in here. And I started cleaning it up, and I realized that the gasket that came with it, this is one of the problems. Look at it. It's got a pretty good rip in it. You see that? And it's just falling apart. So I found believe it or not, it was a rubber O-ring off of a gas can, and it happened to be really close to this size right here. So I'm gonna try it. Here's the problem though. Take these bolts out. Of course, this thermostat housing was all crapped up with calcium and old coolant, and it just, I had to really buff it up. I used a Dremel with some wire wheel attachments, and, you know, lightly, you know, I didn't put too much pressure because this is aluminum, you know. But anyways, I cleaned it up. I was gonna go put it back on the bike, but then I saw something which probably contributed to me losing that coolant. Anyway, here's that seal from a gas can. It's a rubber O-ring. It happened to be really close to the size. I just kind of stretched it a little bit, worked it, and it fit in that channel. Okay, but here's the thing. I could button everything up real tight and everything, but it's not going to matter. You know why? Look what I found. Where is it? There it is. See that crack? Bam. So you're gonna, you know, possibly gonna lose coolant through there, and you won't be able to tighten it up properly either. So I don't know. It's plastic. I might try to use some of that JB Weld. You could use it on plastic and stuff like that. I might try that. And then might have to bore that hole out a little bit because I'm going to goop it up a little with that JB Weld. After it dries and sets up, then I'll have to bore that hole just a little bit out for the bolt to fit through there. Luckily, there's no threads on these holes here. Okay, they're just guiding holes. The threads are on the thermostat housing, aluminum housing here. So yeah. See what happens. So applying this JB water weld, you need to prep the material first. You want to make sure it's clean. And, you know, I kind of liken it to welding with putty, okay? But you want to prep, like the crack, I kind of V'd it out, okay? Not all the way through, but halfway through. Oh, you can see that or not. There's like a channel there. I kind of V'd it out with that small stone on my Dremel. And I did that on the inside too, just a little bit. So see how it's a little bit oblong, the hole, it's not quite round. It's because I was grinding into the plastic a little on the underside as well. Now I'm going to apply my JB water weld to both top sides. You can see the channel better there. See that groove I made? It's going to give it strength once it dries and sets up, and then you can kind of polish it a little bit and take the high spots down a little, and it should work. Okay. Alright, so this is what I'm using. It's the JB Weld water weld. Okay, world's strongest bond, strength 1300 psi, set time 25 minutes, and it takes 1 hour to fully cure and harden. And it works on fiberglass, PVC, plastic, copper, brass, iron, aluminum, you know, and you could read the rest there. But this stuff's really good. Like I used it on my wife's radiator on a Corolla, I think, I don't know, a couple years ago. And there was a plastic fitting port that broke off. Well, without that port being sealed, it's just going to spew with the pressure in the system. It's going to spew that coolant out like crazy. So, but I used this JB water weld. Vehicle driving by. I used this JB water weld, and it's held up. It's worked just great. Otherwise, I was gonna have to buy a whole new radiator. So it saved me. So I'm hoping it's gonna save me again on this job. So it's like a putty. It comes in a tube. I don't know if I could get it out of here or not. Come on. There we go. Looks like a roll. And basically you just cut your, get a knife. I'm using a kitchen knife. My wife probably gonna kill me if she finds out. But I'm gonna just take just a tiny little sliver of it. I'm not doing very much here. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. And you just work this stuff. Just work it. I actually took off way more than I needed from what I'm doing, but whatever. And there's two different epoxies in there, or there's like a resin and some other. And when they mix together, when you smush them together and work them together, that's what causes it to activate, and then it will cure. Hard as a rock. And it's good for wet applications. Okay. Alright, so I got it on there. I know it's a lot bigger than it has to be, but that's okay, because you could grind it, you could sand it and grind it, so not a big deal. But I want to make sure I have enough that's going to give it that strength and fill in everything that it was cracked. And I used one of the old bolts to work it in on the inside, and kind of so it's not so covering the whole diameter. And I kind of smushed it up against the inside there with like I said, with that bolt, one of those bolts, and it did a pretty good job. So after it dries, after an hour, I'm going to sand it and see what happens. Alright, so the JB water weld is hardened up. It's been like an hour and a half, whatever, and I can get the bolt to go cleanly through that hole with no issues. So I'm going to leave that alone. You can see I sanded it down, the high spots. I left the top of the collar of that, or that ear there, a little bit long, but it's not going to affect, there's nothing there in the way, so it won't matter. What matters is this surface right here. So let me put this down and explain. So on this thermostat housing, you have this surface outside of the O-ring channel, right? This here, right in here, all the way around. Okay, So there's an O-ring that goes in this channel right here, and it sticks up above this surface. So you got to make sure that you sand that side down where it's going to be flush with that surface. You don't want it sticking above, because then you won't get enough of a crush on that O-ring to seal. Because where it seals is only around that O-ring itself. Okay, it doesn't seal anywhere on the outside diameter of this O-ring, in this area right in here. It does not seal at all. It seals on the O-ring surface only. So just so you know, so you don't have to worry about putting any goop on this or any kind of you know, gasket maker. You don't need it. The O-ring is what's going to make the seal. And we strengthened this collar up, filled that crack in with this JB water weld, so we should be good. I'm going to snug it up here in a little bit and hook everything up and fill it up, and we'll see what happens from there. No bubbles. That's great. We're all good. They didn't have any damage to the engine. All right, I took it for a good test drive and got on it and got it nice and warmed up and hot, and I didn't have nothing dripping or boiling over. By the way, I left these guards off, those plastic guards, those corner pieces on either side, just so I can monitor that. See that thermostat housing right there? Just to make sure nothing's dripping or leaking. I'm gonna do that for about a week, just to make sure, before I put those back on. By the way, I figured out my fan does work. For some reason the wiring was, I don't know what they did to it, but it wasn't working, and so I went ahead and hardwired it, just temporarily for right now. I got a fuse too hooked into that wiring. But I basically ran a SAE cable from my battery tender connection, and I could plug it in. Watch, ready? So I could have that radiator fan running for extra cooling, and I never had that hooked up before the whole time I've had the bike. Never had an issue though, even though I didn't have it running, because I didn't really do any in-town stop and go and sitting there getting hot. I was always going down the highway with plenty of wind. But in the summer, with the heat, you're going to want that fan running all the time, just to prevent any kind of engine damage from the heat. So, oh, and when I did that radiator check, of course I didn't have any bubbles. That's good. That means the head gasket's fine. And they were swirling, so the thermostat was opened up. And you want to let it idle and monitor that with the cap off for about a minute. Don't let it run too much longer than that. And that'll get all the bubbles out of the system, any air bubbles in your cooling system there. And that's about it. So if you have this issue, first things first, check your thermostat. Put it in some pan of water and heat it up, make sure it opens. Then you want to check for leaks, which I had a leak on the thermostat housing. And I think I had some air bubbles in my system, because I didn't really do what I just told you with letting it run with the cap off for a minute the last time I added coolant to it about a month ago. So I could have had some air in the system as well. But I'm gonna, like I said, monitor it for another week just to make sure. Keep it close to home, within like 5 miles. And there you go.